What is up, theology nerds? This is Trip. You're listening to Homebrewed Christianity, and today this is a special episode because I have not one, not two, but three friends of mine. That is right. Brian McLaren, Micky ScottBey Jones, Daneen Akers are all on the podcast, and we're talking about something that is a topic y'all consistently ask me to talk about, which is kind of odd considering this is an extremely nerdy podcast, but it is parenting. We're talking about parenting. Parenting for the common good. How do you parent? Think about parenting and, not suck at it after leaving behind your kind of much more conservative, judgmental, narrow religious experience from the past. Well, I'm excited about it because my friend Brian McLaren, as you probably heard in a recent podcast, has a brand new children's book out called The Seventh Story, and you can find it at the7thstory.com. It's awesome. It's a children's book. It's a children's book you can read to your kids and get jazzed about the theology and the story. And it's written well because Brian McLaren is an excellent writer. You know, Brian McLaren's kind of like the godfather of the emerging church movement, who has then managed, because he is simultaneously articulate, kind, friendly, joyful, managed to connect with almost every part of the church in a real affirming and exciting way. Now, I personally love him because he agreed to run a track at the International Whitehead Festival, where 6,000 people that love Alfred North Whitehead, the process philosopher of awesome sauce. We ran a track together at it where we got to do a whole host of sessions on process philosophy and, the future of American religion and such. But he could permanently ask me to do almost anything for him, and I'll say yes because he meant I got to be a track head at the International Whitehead Festival. So that's awesome. And the funny thing is, I actually like Micky ScottBey Jones more than Brian, and he's probably going to be okay with hearing that because Micky was a divinity school correspondent on Homebrewed Christianity years ago, 7-8 years ago. Now, Micky is she's grown up. She's a Justice Doula. She does all sorts of exciting stuff. And basically, she is a mom, a speaker, a nonviolent practitioner, a contemplative activist, and packs the universe full of awesome sauce. So, why aren't you going to like Micky? If you listen to Homebrewed Christianity regularly, I'm sure you've heard her voice before, and she's awesome. And then I have a brand new friend who I'm excited about, Daneen Akers, who is the author of Holy Troublemakers and Unconventional Saints, which is a Kickstarter campaign for a children's book that tells the stories, the narratives of 50 different people of faith who worked for love and justice in this world, which you should just go check it out. Holy Troublemakers and Unconventional Saints. 50 different people, cool art, cool stories, but it tells the stories of people your children can look up to. It's pretty sweet. And when someone has a Kickstarter that gets popular, gets feedback from awesome people like Glennon Doyle, Brian McLaren, Project Greer, people like that, then you want to check it out. You check it out. It's awesome. I've looked at the book and I'm like, this is amazeballs. So, consider if you have a kid in your life, or, know someone that does, get them Holy Troublemakers and Unconventional Saints. You could check out The Seventh Story because we had talked about it here in Parenting for the Common Good. Now, two little things before we jump into this podcast. Number one, Cosmic Campfire, the event, February 1st and 2nd in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. It's going to be zesty. It's going to be me, Science Mike Morrell, and we have a whole host of people that are joining the party. You may say to yourself, Trip, who's going to be at the cosmic campfire? Well, one, the campfire is not like a normal event where you just sit and listen. It is a cornucopia of different ways of interacting. But Joan Roughgarden is going to be speaking, interacting, doing some Q&A, who is a rather famous cosmic evolutionary panentheist scientist who has been at the frontiers of looking at the role of sex, sexuality, and eco-spirituality in human. Just Google Joan Roughgarden. Also, Barbara A. Holmes is going to be contributing, who's the author of Race in the Cosmos, one of the kindest, nicest, smartest, most intuitive people. And I read Race in the Cosmos when I was in divinity school, and it was a very impactful book. She's been on the podcast before, and it's gonna be awesome. But okay, I'm most excited only because this person is indeed one of my theological soulmates. But Robin Henderson Espinosa is going to be in the house. Now, we're going to be cosmic campfiring, talking about all sides, cosmic origins, deep ecology, human evolution, real transformation, what all that looks like at the intersection of spirituality, religion, science, and all that kind of stuff. But on top of a scientifically rigorous, skeptically persistent, experimentally intoxicating, and spiritually humble experience, you're also going to be invited to join the party that Robin Henderson Espinosa brings. And they're basically like the 1% of awesome. Now, that is unrelated to class assessment. There's awesome all over the place. But Robin Henderson Espinosa, 1%, a 1%er when it goes to awesomeness, to excitement, to fun. And when we get together, the nerd out interaction is exciting. So just saying, you should check out Cosmic Campfire .party. February 1st and 2nd, Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and it's gonna be a lot of fun. I forgot about this, but I guess I should mention it. In just a few weeks, in January, on the 12th of January, Saturday, there's gonna be a live podcast in Nashville, Tennessee, which you can find out more info on the internet, like at tripfuller.com. That's my name with 2 P's. And last is right now, for the end of this year of 2018, you can watch my movie, The Road to Edmond, and enjoy it. Just go to JesusLovesOurMovie.com, and you can watch it and donate anything from like $0 to $1 million, and you can watch the movie. I really just want as many people to watch as possible. So you should just go. And you could even pretend you watched it, or pretend you donated $1 million, but only gave 5 cents. I will never know. I just really want people to watch it because I made a buddy road trip comedy with progressive spiritual themes, and I've been getting all this different feedback, and I'm so excited about it that I want everyone to get to watch it. Next year to go into festivals, and then there's a, distribution company that's doing stuff with it. So then the powers that be will be in charge of it. Until the end of the year, you can access it. This weekend, do it. All right? And if this is after the end of the year when you're listening to this, just go to theroadtoedmond.com. And then you can find out wherever you can get access to it, when you can get access to it. But for now, we're going to talk about parenting for the common good. Because you know what? When you have a kid and you're their parent, you want to be in the top half. That's what I promised my children. I said, of all the parents alive on this planet today, yours are in the top half. Now, I think we're doing better than that, but that's my promise. Last thing. Share this. Share it. Because Daneen, Micky, Brian, awesome people. They share amazing stuff. If you know anyone or yourself, a progressive Christian trying to figure out what to do with parenting, then this is an excellent episode to share. And there's some other stuff coming up in the future connected to this. It's exciting. I've already recorded like 16 interviews for next year and have booked another 23. It's going to blow your earpiece. All right? So enjoy. Smoochy Boochies Theology Nerds. Hello, everyone. This is Trip, and we're having a very exciting conversation today with, two dear friends and a brand new one. Right down here is Daneen. She and I are meeting digitally. We've met on the internet. Now we're meeting in digital person. And
it's almost for real.
Yeah, almost for real. It's a simulated encounter. And then we have Brian McLaren, who, I've known him met him in person. We've been together multiple times. He is a real human. I met him. And then, probably knows too much personal information about me. I hope doesn't go live on Facebook, but I trust her because she's that super awesome. Micky, right down there. So now I guess I should have looked to see if everyone's boxes are in the same direction.
No, they're not. So
as they are on Facebook. So, who knows? I pointed at random people. You have to guess it. But we're here today to talk about parenting for the common good. I set small goals that everyone that watches this and implements 1/3 of it will be in the top half of parents. Because I really feel like that's all parents are hoping for. They're like, I don't know what the others do that they don't admit they do, but I just kind of want to be in the top half of parents. And some go for the whole shebang. I'm just saying, I want to look at my kids with confidence and go, I know most people had it worse. That's so. Now we're inspired to start this, to kick it off, because Brian, or whichever direction he is on your screen, actually wrote a children's book with Gareth Higgins, friend of ours here. So as we kick it off, I want Brian to make sure he gives the invite to the children's book, because this is a children's book that does raise spiritual religious themes, and they aren't spiritual religious themes where the deity is out to smite you unless you assent to the right truths. It's also inviting you to be spiritual and religious, to embody a beautiful story in the world. I read it. Don't see that anywhere does it encourage you to show up and throw a pair of scissors and a fish at a tribe that asked you not to come by. Like, that wasn't in there. So if you're hoping for your child not to take their faith so seriously that happens, but they take it seriously and do, peacemaking love things, then it's an excellent book. So Brian, why don't you tell us about it and how we all ended up here?
Sure. Well, first I'll do that. And then Daneen is also working on a wonderful book that I hope she'll say something about too. But by way of parenting cred, my wife, Grace, and I raised 4 children. And now 2 of those children have children. So we have 5 grandchildren. And you never get done with caring about parenting. As well, I would have to say, as a guy who goes around and speaks to church groups, clergy groups, and so on around the country, I'm pretty sure this is true. It feels true. The most common question I'm asked in any setting is, how do we teach our kids about God and the Bible? In other words, what's behind that is this sense, the way I was taught, I don't want to pass on. I don't want to, and that there are any number of details about that. But so I know this is really, really important. And I think what's happening to a lot of people is they're so sure that they don't want to pass on the version of religion that they inherited, that they're not passing much of anything on. They're trying to avoid the bad, but they don't know what the good is. And so that's what really is behind this idea of parenting for the common good. As part of my struggle with this, Gareth and I stumbled into this idea of writing a children's book that would help contain what I see as the core message of Jesus, but do it without overtly religious language. So that's kind of the idea. And we wrote a book called Cory and the Seventh Story. It's about a little village of animals where a young raccoon and his best friend, an owl, travel through the town, and they start seeing certain stories get played out again and again. And they realize that there are 6 stories they see again and again that keep leading people. They promise happiness. They promise security. They keep leading to pain and sometimes violence and hurt. And they start looking for a 7th story that could lead to peace and reconciliation. So that's the idea of the book. We found this wonderful illustrator named Heather Lynn Harris, award-winning illustrator, who helped us bring the whole thing to life. And the irony for me is I've written books that have like 80 or 90,000 words, and this has something around 2,000. And I feel like as invested in this as anything else that I've ever done. So it's been a wonderful process. Yeah. And Daneen, what can you say about the project you're working on?
Well, I first want to reiterate that the very first question I think I ever asked you when I met you 5 years ago, 6 years ago, my very first question was, well, this is wonderful, but where are the books for the kids? Because I have little kids and I don't want to share almost anything that I was raised with that have anything to do with God or faith or spirituality with them. And in that time, I was a documentary filmmaker at the time, and I kept thinking that a bunch of books were going to come out. I'm thrilled this one is. But there really haven't been that many that have come out, and there continue to be great resources for adults, podcasts, books, blogs that I feel like work in this space that we're in, and very little for children. And I have 2 daughters. One is 3 and one is almost 10. And my almost 10-year-old just refuses to read things that are like exclusively masculine imagery and pronouns for the divine, don't have any LGBT people in it. She can really sense the substitutionary atonement. There's something really wrong with you on the inside. And it just makes her feel icky. And she's like, Mommy, I really don't like the way these books talk about God. I wish I could read a book that talked about God the way you talk about God. And so the book I'm starting with is called Holy Troublemakers and Unconventional Saints. And it's about people like Brian in the modern day, but historically like Bayard Rustin and Mariam Okara, Rabbi Rahina Jonas, people of diverse faiths who have worked for love and justice. Because if we're going to have faith, it needs to be better. It needs to be this type of faith that is helping us transcend fear and othering. And these are the faith heroes that I would like my kids to know about. So it's an illustrated book. You can actually see some of the artwork that's come in behind me here. It's like phenomenal working with artists. I'm absolutely loving it. And it will be 50 people. So it's in the works. And but I am really, really thrilled to have Cory in the 7th story. I've already pre-ordered it for Christmas. So we need a lot of these books. When I think of walking into like a typical Christian bookstore in that children's section, at the moment, I think there's about 5 to 10 in the more progressive Christian parenting category. And, we need hundreds. So everything is needing to be done. And so I'm very excited. There's starting to be some better offerings.
Yeah, and one of the things I'm excited about in this conversation is just how many people, sitting questions, how many people are really interested in these type of resources. So hopefully letting people know about, the work y'all are doing will help create a demand for more resources. Because, the story of Jesus and at the heart of the Christian faith is a really beautiful narrative that I think there are places to connect with children and families at each kind of stage of their development. And for so often, the more progressive expressions of the faith have kind of insisted you finish reading all the Jesus seminar books before you get around to practicing your faith and such. And that's just not necessary. In fact, kids can read the parables of Jesus and challenge us as parents and as church leaders. So I'm super excited about this. And one of my favorite humans and moms is Micky, a justice doula. So Micky, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us just exactly how you got a title like Justice Doula and what it's like, owning that title with your family.
Yeah. Well, Daneen, as you were talking, it actually brought up how kind of very different my parenting experience has been. I've been parenting my children through my own faith transitions. So I have, very distinct memories of reading the children's Bible. So I was a homeschooling, creation only teaching mama, like real deep in the very conservative world. And I remember doing bedtime with my kiddos and reading the children's Bible, right, which was supposed to be like a kind of softer, gentler Bible version. But for a while, my middle child, who is now 15, my children are 12, 15, and 18, got real stuck on the crucifixion. So I'm like, we have this whole Bible to work with. And he, over and over, all he wanted me to read was like the torture and death of Jesus. And I was like, what is happening? Like, I was so worried I was going to warp his little brain, but he kept asking for it and I kept reading it. Oh, so that, we, again, even those kinds of materials, right? That's supposed to be like a gentler, like children's version of the Bible. And it was still just filled with this kind of violent understanding and focus on atonement as, a particular type of atonement as the way. And so I'm kind of a professional mom in some ways, in that I was a mother-baby specialist for over a decade. So I was a birth and postpartum doula trainer, lactation consultant, IBCLC, and worked with new families bringing their babies into the world. And so that included all ages. And I also came from a background, my bachelor's degree is in child development, consumer and family sciences with an emphasis in child development and family studies. So that's where I started, and then got into kind of community development and working with adolescents. And then after I had my first child, who's now 18, like I actually raised one to adulthood.
Well done. I
know, like, oh my God, we both made it. And she's going off to college in the fall. And so then I became a birth worker and a mother baby specialist and did that. And then realized that those skills could be transferred to the justice world. And so the same heart and hands, which are the doula's most important tools, are the same tools that we use to help birth more love, justice, and shalom into the world. And so really functionally moved into justice work. I didn't really realize that's what I was doing when I was doing things like advocating for women's birthing rights in Nashville, Tennessee, where I live. Through some of the work I did, we were able to get more humane birthing practices in the hospitals in Nashville. And so things like birth tubs and more midwives and more choices for families. I didn't know that was activism, but that's the kind of work that I was involved in, besides actually helping families in their, immediate birthing needs. And so then moved into primarily faith-rooted justice work that grew into racial justice work and just more kind of specific justice campaigns. But how do we include healing and resilience building into that, right? Because if it's destroying our families to do our justice work, if it means that we come to organizing meetings and everybody's starving because it's after work and there's no food and there's no water and everybody's miserable and cranky, like, is that really the world we're trying to create? No, we want to create marches where families can be a part. We want to create organizing meetings where people can bring their kiddos and there's something to eat and there are coloring sheets and, parents are able to be leaders because they are often the ones most affected, and the ones who are struggling to get to a meeting because they have to work 2 jobs are often the ones most affected, right? So how do we actually create movements that are centered on healing, that are centered on relationships and are actually about us all being healthy and strong and doing our healing while we're actually creating the justice that we need to see for ourselves. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the work I do in the world.
Micky, I've known you for a long time, but I've just learned a bunch of things about you. That's fantastic.
Yep.
I love that.
There's a lot going on in my life.
I remember thinking that the midwives that I met and doulas having children were some of the wisest women that I'd ever encountered, and were so centered in their own wisdom and in the wisdom of the mother and baby. Like them, I feel like actually my experience with a midwife helped me on my journey to eventually have a faith evolution, because she empowered me to trust myself and trust my heart. And I think actually, like, that's just a beautiful, beautiful thing, because I think the justice work that a lot of us care about can be so exhausting and just overwhelming, that I love, like, the doula aspect of, like, care and healing and gentleness and nurture needs to be part of this too.
Well, and we have the risk of turning our children from this pursuit of justice that we're doing all this work around, right? Like, if we ignore our children, if we are, constantly setting them aside so we can do the work.
Yeah.
And this is a risk for faith leaders, for activists. One of the reasons I've had an opportunity to spend time with Alice Walker a couple of times, and I've always been intrigued by her story, because she went through a period of time where her daughter really kind of was upset with her and kind of rejecting her work. They're now reconciled and have a good relationship. But, that is a risk when we are working long hours and we are so passionate about the things we're passionate about. And if we don't have some way of transmitting these beliefs to our children, not just dragging them to marches when they're cold and hungry and cranky, right? But actually engaging them in ways that feels real to them, then we may lose them. They're going to see the alternative as having answers, because they've been rejected by us.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's really important. Brian, were you about to say something?
I was just about to say, well said. There's a kind of boomerang effect that, kids see their parents in some ways live an imbalanced life in one extreme, and they, in a sense, they try to counterbalance that. So, well said.
Yeah. One of the questions that came up, I think, really connects with the doulaing image itself. I know Alicia and I have 3 children. 11, 5, and 1. And we had a doula with the second and third child's birth. And one of the things that you learn in that experience is that a lot, because our culture kind of keeps you away from the reality of birth and the whole birthing process. And actually our culture works hard to just silence women and their own health, their experiences with their health and their bodies in general. That a lot of men go into the situation going like, all right.
They've only seen it in a movie.
Yeah,
right.
And
a super dramatic, crazy scene.
It's like this. There's this alien happening. And I remember the first time we met with the doula, she looked at me and goes, "Now I know this may sound weird, but humans have been doing this as long as there have been humans, and it tends to go well.
Yeah.
So what we need you to do is just trust the process and be present."
Yeah.
Now, after that, there's a lot of things you can learn, but until you change your face that you have right now, you're not going to be present in the best way.
Yeah.
And I remember that moment and thinking about the notion of doula, that a lot of times parenting's like that.
Absolutely.
That there's a whole industry of delivering new data about what works and doesn't work as parents and how to have successful kids and all this type of thing. That 2 of the questions we got in are similar. And I said, I want to be the best parent I can be, but every day I learn new things I should do or not do, feed them and not feed them, when to get them up, when to put them down. Do I want them to succeed culturally and economically, or do I want them to focus on the common good? But what if I focused on it too much and then they don't have the opportunities available to them to really provide for their family in the future? I just don't know. I feel over-informed and over-inadequate. So like when you're thinking of that situation today where all of this pressure is sitting there and it's like you're showing up as an alien to this experience of being a parent, when I think one of the opportunities we have is to follow that doula method or just to follow the awareness that actually God's always been present, working with parents and families as they are. So like, how do you find how do you envision that process of parenting and the presence of God in the process without getting overwhelmed by all the challenges and information that's sitting there for parents?
I mean, I'm overwhelmed all the time. I mean, let me just break that secret out.
Yes.
I mean, every time I think I've got it, then there's something new to learn. I mean, I will admit I'm a pretty damn good mom of babies. Like for me, that's like strap them to your body, you know, give them the boob every once in a while, snuggle them in your arms. Like for me, that was my sweet spot. There are other people who, when their children are babies, they're like, I just want you to be able to grow up and talk and walk and get away from me. Like, you know, everybody's kind of good at a different phase. And, you know, and once you think, you know, if you have more than one child, then you have another one that you're like, all the things that work for this one somehow do not work at all for this other one.
So true.
So, you know, it wasn't until my last one that I had one that had colic, you know, and then I had to learn entirely new things. And, you know, one question I used to ask myself when my kids were little is what would a mom in sub-Saharan Africa do? Like, does she have a clock and is she scheduling her baby? No. She's got a piece of cloth, put her baby on her back, and she's like doing her thing. So as much science as we have, I also think we need to tap into just our humanity and realize that this is a little human that we're raising. They're not entirely different than us. They need love and warmth and food and the things, you know, other people. And you know, finding your way through that with, you know, not trying to be perfect, but, you know, asking yourself, what kind of person do I want this child to grow up to be? Yeah. You know, and then settling in on some of those principles, you know, and we're going to have different ones. For some people, it is, I want my child to be wealthy. I want them to be a superstar. Well, then that's an entirely different way of raising a child than if you want them to be the kind of person who loves other people and lives for the good of humanity. Yeah. And you're going to make different choices based on that.
I totally second that. And yes to the overwhelms all the time. I have the 3-year-old in addition to the almost 10-year-old, and I'm 42. And I daily say to myself, toddlers are a younger woman's game. And my second is a totally different personality type than my first. So yeah, all the stuff, right, doesn't work in the same way. My first is much more similar to me. She's a philosopher, thinker, writer, super verbal. My second only just really started talking and is the like, instantly wants to like do everything on the playground and, you know, leap into anybody's arms who happens to be like within a 10-foot radius. And you're just like, oh my God. Like, so like all the stuff, right, it has to be adjusted for like actually that child. And I do agree that the information overload right now, like what we have access to, is amazing in some ways. And it's also debilitating because we have not evolved as a species to have as many connections as we have that are like possible right now. And the information, we just can't figure out where to place it all. And I felt like with my first, I literally read, probably 25 books on birthing. I was going to be the like home birth, beautiful, gentle, all of that. Ended up with a baby who couldn't be born that way because of positioning and had a C-section. And then realized I hadn't read a single book on young infant care. And that's actually a whole lot more time than the birth itself. And so I'm an input person. I like to read it all. And then eventually I got to the point where I stopped taking a lot of that input because I'd found the way to listen to that child and the moment. And in some ways, that's how I think this book and the need for more like this came across, is because the books that we did have and the resources, my older child kept not accepting it, and she would question it. And including the children's Bible stuff, she thought the flood story was deeply, deeply disturbing, which it is. But we decorate children's nurseries with those scenes, you know? And she was so upset by the idea. She still is. She'll get righteously angry because she's a total little Hufflepuff animal rights type. She's a vegetarian, sensitive kid. And the thought of all those animals who died is so deeply unfair to her. She's less bothered by the humans in the story as the animals who had nothing to, no input. And to her, that was never a loving God. Like none of that felt good. And some of those questions that she would ask is what, led me to these places. And so I think figuring out how to tune in to our actual child and helps filter some of the information that we may or may not need, because it is completely overwhelming these days. And you can read a report one day that says, well, like they need all of this. And the next day, like actually like that is leading to like ADHD. You know what I mean? Like it can be really frustrating. But back to Tripp's doula, sometimes I totally try to tap into that too. And also Micky, the women, my husband actually, the reason we, when we came home and we eventually ended up like, we couldn't figure out where she was going to sleep. It was a huge thing. And he eventually was like, hey, how did cavemen sleep with their babies?
Right.
And he was like, you know what? Probably not at the coldest, furthest end of the house by themselves. And that's how he came into like having a kid in bed with us for, well, honestly, longer than people who are opposed to this would want. But I do go back to that sometimes. Like, okay, humans have been doing this for a long time, and I only have my limited capacity. But if I tap into the wisdom that women before me have had, like you're actually getting to tap into that flow of like human time that's gone on for a really long time. And it almost is the way I feel in cathedrals, even though that's not where I worship today. I worship in a really, really non-traditional church space. And yet I think that sacred space sometimes we're stepping into a place where people have done something for millennia. And I feel like if you can tap into that with the parenting sometimes too, like people have snuggled this baby, they have nursed in this way, for thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands upon years. Like it's going to be okay. But the scarcity model today, that like the competitiveness of like, we've got to get them ahead so that they're not going to suffer. It's all about those narratives that Brian's trying to address in this book, like the competition and fear of if we don't prepare them for all the stuff, they're not going to have enough. It can really do a number on you.
Yeah. And kids pick up stories that you act upon, even if you don't tell it to them.
Absolutely.
One of the questions that came in knowing that the Brian, who has successfully finished parenting duties.
Oh my gosh.
And
you finish? You finish?
You don't finish, but anyway.
Look, I'm just reporting. So, and until they all leave, you just got to let us know there's a finish line. It can get deferred, like the eschaton. But if you already know it's going to be perpetually delayed, it really that apocalyptic fervor just dilutes. So, one of the questions was knowing, like when you were a parent and the books that those of us that followed your work read, like you were in the process of reworking your relationship to the tradition and faith of your origin and to scripture and to science and religious pluralism. And then the everything must change happens. And you're like reworking how you understand faith and politics. A couple people sent in questions that were really about how do you think about what you share and you don't share of your processing with your kids at different ages, and how do you give them confidence in a few things so they can connect to God and faith on their own without inviting them into being disturbed by Derrida when they haven't even figured out how to spell their middle name yet. So like, can you kind of give us some input or lessons you learned in the process of deconstructing and reconstructing your own faith as a father and husband for those of us in the middle of it?
Yeah, well, first, let me say one of the things that makes it really hard now is that all of those books on deconstructing and reconstructing your faith are available. So there's help for adults going through it, which then puts them out of sync with where their kids are, right? When I was coming along, there was very little to help the adults. And so it was a different situation then. I'd say the good news is the books are there for the adults. The good news is I think the books are on the way to help both parents and kids. And I think this conversation is advancing. But in the meantime, when we feel that struggle, look, I think lying is a bad idea. And one of the things we've got to make sure we don't do is lie to our kids. So it's simply saying we want to tell them the truth. I remember hearing Walter Brueggemann once say that teaching about God is a lot like teaching kids about sex. you never want to tell them things that later you'll have to admit you were lying about. But you never want to tell them more than they're ready to handle. And you want to give them good answers to their questions. And I think that's pretty good. That's pretty good advice. I think the other thing is, so many of us we inherited a version of religion that was really about what you believe. And it was less about what you love. And I think moving forward, in the middle of this gap, we would be very smart to focus a lot more on what we love, to make that really, really central, and be as honest and passionate as we can about what we love, and explain why that's connected to our sense of what the universe is about, and what whatever the spirit of creation is about, and so on. And then we can, when we talk about beliefs, we can do it a little more playfully and a little more like, well, here's what I think. What do you think? So that's what comes to mind. One other quick anecdote. Before my wife and I had children, we met this couple who had kids who we really, really liked. We loved how they were raising their kids. And I went to the husband once. I said, gosh, we admire you guys so much. He laughed. He said, well, the first thing you need to know is, he said, I got divorced and this is my second marriage. If we look good now, you should have seen my first time around. It wasn't so great. And then he said, if I have one piece of advice to give you, it would be, do your very, very best for your kids. And then when they grow up, tell them, I'm really, really sorry. You deserved better. And, that advice, I think, is also really good. It takes the pressure off of us to be perfect. We're never going to be as good parents as our kids deserve. And if we love them, we really will feel that way, And I think that we're going to give all the love we can and focus on love. I think that's the best in the gap. That's the best advice.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Trip, I want to jump in here too, because like I said, my kids have been through my faith transitions with me. And part of that faith transition was while I was still married to their father. We're now divorced. And we have gone in very different directions spiritually since that. And so we don't quite have like a unified idea of how to now like kind of teach faith or transmit faith. So for me, part of it has been, because my work is faith-rooted work, I try and expose my kids to speakers, including myself. So I'll take them with me to hear me speak or preach. And then I will also, because like they were being fully indoctrinated in conservative Christianity at one point. Now, because of their different ages, they all kind of have different pieces of it, their ages and their personalities and who they are. So my oldest currently would say she's exploring the world of Wicca. My middle is kind of agnostic-y. We don't talk about it a whole lot, but that's probably where he would say he is. He's very interested in science. He likes hard facts. So he needed, his shifting it was harder for him to shift, because he was like, we believe these things and these things are right. I need other things to believe. So he's a difficult shift. My baby just started going to youth group at a local like Southern Baptist plant and is happy as a clam. And that has been super difficult for me. Right. And so they are vastly different in how they're reacting to faith. Out of the three of them, I think the baby would be the only one who would say, I'm a Christian, right? And I don't even know what he thinks that means at this point. We've had some conversations about how to interact in youth group, and like me kind of without too much of my own stuff coming up, like they start to tell you things that don't feel right. You know that you don't have to believe anything. I'm like having all this thing, like if they say bad things about LGBTQ people, you know people and love people, and so that's some of my stuff that I'm having to deal with, right? Is he goes to youth group and he's literally like, I don't know, we play games and eat food and then they like talk about things. And I'm like, what are they saying? He's like, I don't know, right? He's not listening. He is like, he loves people. That's all he cares about. And so, you guys know, Trip and Brian, at least, that my kids have been coming with me to Wild Goose for the past 5 or 6 years at this point. And so I don't often do a lot of direct teaching. I mean, I do at times, Christmas time. Sometimes we do devotionals together. We do bedtime together. And so there's conversation there. But there is a lot of I'm going to take you somewhere and you're going to be around my people and you're going to soak it in. You're going to ask the questions you want to ask. But you're going to get that exposure by being with the people. And so that has been sort of my game plan along the way, is like, I'm going to put them in situations where they're going to be with people at different stages of their, faith journey, who would say different things, might actually believe different things than I believe, and encourage them to kind of do their own wrestling and understanding and admit that, yes, mommy used to believe these things and now I've changed my mind, or this is how I understand God, or this is what I think about these things now. But often I find them pretty resistant, especially now as teenagers, to a lot of me straight out saying, this is what I believe and this is what I think is right. For the most part, they are not interested. They do not want to hear it. But I do the same thing, like you were saying with sex ed. I actually buy them books. Like, we joke about how, like, I'm literally always buying them a new book on sex and like putting it on their bed. They're like, Mom, enough books on sex. We're good. Because I want them to have the resources that they can go back to without always having to come to me and ask the question, but knowing that the door is open.
Mm-hmm.
That's great.
Can I mention 2 resources, Trip, that I think anybody who's navigating this space would appreciate? One is there's a private Facebook group called Raising Children Unfundamentalist that one of the modern day holy troublemakers in my book runs, Cindy Wong Brandt. She's that one down there with her rainbow shirt. She's also writing a book that comes out in February called Parenting Forward, and she runs a podcast called Parenting Forward that is all about all of this. And Brian was recently a guest on there. So she does a phenomenal job moderating that group. I've been in a lot of groups, and it's one of the most positive groups experiences that I've had. So Raising Children Unfundamentalist is there. And another book that I am really loving is Tracy Smith's Faithful Families. So she's a pastor, and it's all about just little traditions and rituals. Because I think one of the things that falls away when our faith transitions is there's all these ways that we marked the year, and seasons and transitions in life, that if that ritual is no longer there, like, it's hard. I think humans need these containers to hold these spaces and help us process things. And so it's not a book you have to read in any order. You can just open it up and flip it through. And it's really simple. It's even like ideas on ways to celebrate New Year's as a family, or a new driver, getting their driver's license, or serious stuff like divorce and loss of a pet and death in the family. It's just little ideas to like help you get started, to build those little containers for ritual that can feel sacred, and you can apply whatever language you want, to that. And it's one of those things that has been helping me feel like, okay, I didn't just lose all this stuff. We're also building like something that reflects our values together as still as a family. And so Faithful Families, and she actually has a free Advent calendar that's all like little gratitude practice, or take something to the neighbor today, or things like that. So those are 2 things that are available right now that are definitely resources I'm enjoying.
One of the things that I think is helpful to think about, and I'll admit I'm married to someone who grew up in a fundamentalist home, and I don't have that baggage. So
much less therapy, Trip.
Everyone has blessings and burdens from their family of origin. Just the faith ones are not ones I have. And I think there are a lot of families where different members have different religious trajectories that brought them into the relationship. I mean, I've done hundreds of weddings because I was at a very beautiful church. I had 3 weddings a weekend in California for 10 years. And there's a lot of where the religious community you participate in is often a compromise between parents who've been blessed by different traditions, or leaving one and going into another. And I do think one of the difficult challenges, and this came up in a couple of the questions, is how to frame community participation as a family versus the space you give an individual, and the social science around like what works and for helping children in the long term have healthy spiritualities and see religious traditions as resources. So for those of us that, if you're asking like parenting for the common good, like what ends with seeing religious traditions as blessings to the planet and not curses, and what sees the gifts that tradition brings as avenues for greater depth in living. A couple of things that came up in the research for that, really part of a book Christian Piatt and I have been talking about doing for like 2 years, and then we put it off again. So a couple of things that came up with that I always mention in the parenting classes at church were that if you want your child to see the beauty in multiple religious traditions, then it's your job as a parent and as parents in a community to help them have contact with the depth dimension of any religious tradition. Right? So like you're the one, like whether or not you present the faith in a competitive way with other religious traditions, they're going to pick that up from you more than their minister. Right? That's why so many evangelicals can easily leave it behind, because their parents didn't treat it in a competitive way. But if you don't see religious traditions as competitive ways, as means of keeping you from hell, but as avenues of wisdom handed down from thousands of years across cultures and across places, then discovery in your tradition is helping them develop a palate for tasting excellence, love, and justice in other religious traditions later. And so like how Alicia and I talk about it, and the catchy part is from her, not me, is to go, what are the affirmations our family gives to everyone that's a member of our family and everyone who meets it? So, as the kids get older, whoever the parent really that's closest to that child, like I do it with Elgin, Alicia does it with Cora, who knows with Haven, but is when it gets to a time where they can understand the affirmation, you have a time alone with the parent and they give it to you. And so like our first affirmation you get is, the most true thing about you is you are God's beloved. And they learn it, and you ask, what is the first fuller affirmation? And they say it back. And so then when they're in trouble, when they're in trouble and they're like, I can't believe I did that, I'm so bad. I'm like, what's the most true thing? God's beloved, right? And then the second one is, and so is your neighbor, right? And there's a number of them. And one is, don't live in the past. It's already finished. And then the next one is, where's God ahead? When you ask where is God, say ahead of you. So like, what are the affirmations? And then the other, what do we celebrate? And like you mentioned before, like giving books and stuff, questions. Like when a kid asks a question that like their philosopher father could have an answer to, that is the result of multiple graduate degrees, you don't give it to them. You go, oh, no, that question's too good. You can get a book or a sweet YouTube video. And after you think about it, we can talk about it, because you never ruin a question that's high quality with an answer. Yeah. And
a good question is a great traveling companion is one that I got from Rachel Naomi Remen.
And different like celebrations, like when a friend comes over. I remember my parents, whenever we had our big meal gatherings, when a friend came over, then they always asked like if we could talk about anything right now, what would it be? And you let the guest decide what happens at the table, because you never know. Some people you discover don't turn every meal into an opportunity to debate religion, politics, and the meaning of existence. That was just my family. It creeped out Alicia when she joined, and so if you allow, like what are the things you celebrate, and like what are the practices that you have, and that like the resource you had gives, and it's not that hard. I just feel like there's, and this came up in a couple of questions, is there's a funny one. Oh, here it is. Like. I know God doesn't get said unless I set the table for it. And I get creeped out that I'm the one that's supposed to set the table for explicit talk about God, religion, and spirituality. WTF ? I would have used the letter, or I wouldn't have used the letters, but I didn't want to ruin my witness. So, and I understand what they're saying. So like when you think of that tension of of both being the one that's the steward of the sacred in your home and in those relationships, and the one that's like, oh no, I'm the steward. Like, how do you envision like being honest with that space, but also honoring it?
I mean, are we though? Like, kids are super sacred. You know what I'm saying? Like, they have a closeness to the spirit because they're so fresh that we don't, or that we lose at times as grownups. And so, like, honoring how little kids can like, if you've ever seen a slightly bigger kid with a baby and how they can get all up in there, and it's like they're still in awe of the baby, or even with babies, like how, like, this is all new. This is your first butterfly. This is your first snowfall. This is your first dog. This is your, whatever. And it's like, oh, this is your first time here. Okay. And like that, bringing the wonder back, which wonder, is a deep spiritual practice, right? So I think sometimes we can actually take those cues from our children or the children in our lives, right? Because they are in a sense keepers of the sacred, and we need to learn from the way they keep the sacred. I almost wonder if that's, when Jesus has the child on his lap, right? And is talking about the little children, come like a little child, like they've got the secrets, y'all. Come on and listen to what this little kid is going to say. And so we have that opportunity to kind of get with the kids, whatever level that is, right? No matter what their age is. And I mean, I'd love to hear you talk about that, Brian, like those gifts that unfold as they grow, because I'm, that's one of the things that I'm kind of worried about as my daughter goes off to college. She's going to live on campus, and then it's negotiating all the things of like, what happened? Like, how often do I talk to her? How do I tell her I want her to come home? Do I not? I don't know what that next phase is going to look like. So how do we have that back and forth of like honoring the divine spark in every human that we see, including our children, and realizing that we're going to co-create and co-keep the sacred together in our homes, versus you as the parent come down from on high and disseminate all the information. That I think can really put us in a place that we don't actually need to be in. We don't need to take that mantle because it's actually not ours.
Boy, first of all, everything that was just said from each of you, it just gives me a lot of hope, because it's higher quality insight than I ever was given in religious settings when I was, when I was a young parent. But the question that was asked reminds me to what a great degree everything we think of as religion is linked up with patriarchy. And so the idea is that the father sets the religion, the father defines God, the father determines what the game is going on at the table, right? And I think part of what we're struggling with is there a way to bring God in without the patriarchal method of it being imposed and all the rest. And everything you all have already said, I think, is helping people get a feel for what that would mean. The only thing I would add is that I think we can ask questions, to be the Socratic teacher who asks questions and invites kids to be theologians, invites kids to have a voice at the theological table, I think is really important, without needing to correct them and smash down on them. But their opinion counts, but everybody around this table has some insight into this. Let's all be able to talk about it. I also think this is why storytelling is so important for children. The stories that we tell, and we have every right as a member of the table to bring up a story that we think is relevant, but to tell it in a non-patriarchal, non-imposing way. And then the other thing I would say, it really builds on what you said, Micky. Kids themselves bring this up.
Yeah.
I just had a first-time experience, a wonderful experience over the weekend. We took two of my grandkids on a camping trip. Their mother and my other daughter and I went out and took them on a camping trip. As a warm-up for the camping trip, we had a campfire in the backyard. And we were sitting around the campfire, and my 7-year-old granddaughter said, "Why don't we pray?" Like, this came out of nowhere. Why don't we pray? And I think what she felt is something holy and special of sitting around that fire. Yeah. And I think part of it, our task is to be sensitive to those kinds of moments where this sense of the wondrous and the holy arises, and for us to welcome that and make space for that. Not force it. That's part of what ruins it, isn't it? For many of us,
right?
Adults force it, and it has to happen. And then they don't know what to do when it naturally, springs up.
I want to reiterate that I do think children naturally have this sacred sense. I've heard Rabbi Sandy Sasso talk about this before too, that children, and studies have actually shown that young children, whether they are raised in religious households or not, tend to bring up the sacred. It's definitely something that is a part of us. And like my daughter painted this picture of Mother God when she was 8. I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, I don't know if it's a way to do it, but it's a Mother God holding the universe. Her skin is rainbow because she's supposed to represent all people. And I just remember thinking, like, why am I trying to teach her anything about God? Yeah. She can teach me. And I know that feels a little trite and cliche, and not all but I do think there's that bit about, like, we come, and it's that patriarchal idea that whether it's a man or a woman doing this, that there is a set of things we're supposed to believe and supposed to learn, and there's time that you do this stuff. And yes, we do set up containers. We have our rituals, bedtime prayers, or we do go to church and things like that. And yet I do think that children, the whole thing about parenting that's so magical is you get the wonder back. Like you were talking about, Micky. I remember Cheryl Strayed once telling somebody that, like, children will take so much from you. Like, the energy leech is just like, whew, like they will just suck it all out, but they will give you things that you didn't even know you had lost. And I think wonder and the capacity to reimagine and re-experience the beauty and wonder of the world again through children is one of the reasons that Jesus probably said, be like them, because they haven't had that cynical filter or the, like, well, here's the answer and here's the doctrine behind that. Even if we're unlearning those doctrines now, they just approach it in a fresh way. And so I think figuring out the ways to honor those moments and tap into that. And the thing is, they're often very rarely planned. They arise out of creating space for it. And honestly, in my household, what happens is when I put away my devices is when these moments happen. I'm about to go on a social media fast for Christmas again, and my daughter asks for it every year. It's like her gift. Wow. And it's hard for those of us who are doing a lot of this stuff because we're getting our resources, we're having to market, like the world requires this now. And yet I do think we tap into these moments much better when we're present. And it's so hard to be present with all the ways that we're not actually in the space that we're physically occupying these days. It's a real challenge for me, I know.
Well, one of the things that makes me think of is how even that task changes as the child gets older, right? There is a certain awe and wonder, and that's a present and you can be invited into because a child has a certain naivete that you've long forgotten, right? Like they're younger. When they get older and in middle school and beyond, one of the hardest things to cultivate, and there's a lot of developmental psych reasons and cultural parts to this, is how, as their mind catches up with the critical instrumental reason of the Enlightenment, that the world's enchantment doesn't disappear. Part of that is having people they trust name the presence of the sacred in their life and in the community around them. One of the ways that happens is in religious traditions where they actually identify this transition you're going through in adolescence and becoming an adult as a very sacred time, right? Like that critical thinking, awareness, finding your place in the world, that whole thing isn't leaving God behind. It's actually finding God all over again. And another part is that that's a lot of times when parents are embarrassed to be religious and spiritual to their own children. And one of the things I learned, and I got it from Rabbi Brad Artson, who is a rabbi, but also a process rabbi, which, if you know, Tripp is a process theologian, is he said, one of the gifts you give by having your children become adults in a religious tradition is a community that has the benefits of stories, symbols, and signs and practices to talk about the depths they're just now getting shocked by. And that doesn't mean they stay in the tradition or anything, but everyone should get the benefit of one way humanity talks about the depth. And the other thing you can do is by acknowledging God's presence in their life when they don't recognize it. And he said that, and he was talking about the way in which parents in the Hebrew scriptures bless their children. And the rabbis later didn't ask, like, what does the blessing look like? And he says it often depends on how old the child is and what they're facing. So when they're in a struggle, the hands of the parent on the shoulders of the child is to name God's presence in the struggle. When it's a breakthrough and it's something new, it's to help the child that's becoming an adult form their lips to give gratitude and gratefulness to God, because they didn't come into this newness or breakthrough alone. And this that image, and he said what the thing he learned, and he told me this a couple of weeks ago, was, you know, one of his children has no idea how you could get up and not chant the Torah repeatedly throughout the day. And his life is so enriched. And the other one's like, yeah, that's nice, Dad. and he said, what a robust affirmation of God with him gives is a recognition that God actually knows and loves his own children better than he does. And God is inviting them into the next step of beauty and truth and goodness and adventure exactly for who they are.
Yeah.
And so if you know that that's who God is, then you can trust God and celebrate them taking that next step, even if it's away from one part of you, because they are actually a part of you and where they're going. And I heard that just thinking of some of the questions people asked or hearing our stories of our kids being so different, right? Like, you have to actually parent the child you have and not the one you imagined.
Yeah. Or the one you wish you had or prepared for.
Yeah.
Because they're all you have to go with the one you have. And honestly, like I have zero fear about my children being in different places in their faith journeys. Some might be disturbed that I said, Abigail's really exploring Wicca. I have no problem with that. Like, if I really believe in this God who, is ahead of us, who can meet us anywhere, what I want her to have is a robust faith that is meaningful for her. So if I'm like, can I buy you more Wicca books? Like, how do we get that? Like, what crystal would you like me to buy? Like, I want her to explore completely this thing that she's finding meaningful in this moment. She's 18. Next year, it'll be something else, maybe. Like, who knows? But I want her to know that what I'm trying to tell her as her mom is that I care about your spiritual life and your spiritual development. Much like relationships. Does the person that you are with love you? Do they treat you right? Are they kind? I don't care if they're, male, female, non-binary. Like, I don't care. Just, are they treating you right? It's the same thing here. Is your spiritual life treating you right? That's what I need to know. And so, kind of dismantling some of that fear, because I think we do go into this parenting thing with so much fear. And, you were talking about the stories. And Brian, going back to Cory in the 7th story, like, our kids are going to get, even no matter what their faith is, America, they're going to get a kind of American Christianized faith, right? They're going to have that civic religion. And so they're going to get some of those stories. I've met one person in my life who literally had no understanding of any Christian stories, Jesus-y things whatsoever. But for the most part in America, you're going to get those. And so we have a chance to kind of interact with those stories in the way we want to, right? In a way that actually gives them new interpretations or different interpretations than the ones they're going to get as standard practice. And so I think, they're going to get stories with animals. right? And in introducing them to something like this gives them another story, so that even when they're reading those other stories, they can say, oh, this was like this story in Cory's story. This was like this story. This was like this story that we heard in my children's Bible, right? They're going to get kind of different ways to interpret and understand. And then the last thing I would say is that a very practical thing I do is when I pray, because one thing that has survived through the whole journey has been kind of evening bedtime prayer or whatever. And so I do pray with my kids every night. We have a little conversation and we pray. And for the most part, I pray. So I pray in the way I want them to hear. I say, Mother, Father, Creator, God. And I pray about things like help us to forgive ourselves and forgive each other in the ways we've hurt ourselves and each other. We pray for, whatever people that are going through whatever, help us to be gentle with ourselves and, the kinds of things I want them to hear. And not like I've broken away from those it's not just like the Lord's Prayer or something, those are things I want them to know because it's, again, kind of part of just Western culture that they would know the Lord's Prayer, but they've heard that before. So now how can I pray in ways that, if they're not going to hear anywhere else, the idea that God could be mother and creator, they're going to hear it from me. Mm-hmm. So those kinds of things too, not that I'm not like praying to God, but it's really about kind of what are they going to overhear as I pray with them? How are they going to overhear me talking about stories in our culture and ways to reimagine them?
I pray to Mother God to my children also for the same reason, because I know they're not going to hear it elsewhere by and large. We do a little gratitude. We do a high and a low. Yeah. We call it our least and favorite of the day. My 3-year-old has just gotten old enough to start participating in that.
So cute.
She's really upset about my husband eating part of her bagel the other day without her permission. She's been mentioning that as her sad part for days now. And my daughter called me a couple months ago on the fact that in front of her, I pray to Mother God, but she's noticed that when we're in a mixed group with other people, I will just pray to God. And she was like, why don't you pray in front of other people the way you pray in front of me? And I was like, that was one of my New Year accountability things is like, she's like, you ask me, like, I asked her not to read her Harry Potter books, which she's named after Lily Potter. So it's a powerful narrative in our household. It's really sacred scripture. In her conservative family's house where they would find those books upsetting. So you ask me to be respectful of their faith and their house. How come when they're in our house, they're not being respectful of the way that we think about God? And I said, you're 100% right. And I the first time I prayed to Mother God in front of my super fundy in-laws, I was just like, whoa.
Yeah.
But that's, I think, how we model these things and these rituals that are going to give them the capacity to step into it. And now my almost 10-year-old is teaching the 3-year-old to pray, and she's teaching her to pray Mother God. And it's, oh my God, it's so sweet.
I love it.
Well, that's awesome. All right. So one last question, and you can all take a pass at it however you want. Is what is the best piece of parenting advice you've been given?
Oh, mine is short and easy. This is the type of person I am. I wrote a whole bunch of parents that I admired when I was pregnant with my first, asking,
that's awesome.
Give me the stuff. And of course, people wrote back varied stuff. And one of them, who Brian knows also, Ryan Bell, wrote me back and said, get your shit together. Go to therapy if you need to, but work on your own baggage because your kids will bring it all up. And that has proven to be still a very short, salient piece.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I was in La Leche League and was a La Leche League leader when my children were little. And really a lot of the advice that I got there was to follow the baby's need. And that continues on even as they're older. As they go through different stages and phases and need different things from you. I have children now, again, who are teenagers and who are doing that work of differentiation, right? And so following the needs of my children and letting them teach me, not being so caught up in my own, what I need to know, what I think I know and need to pass on to them. Because when I get caught up in that, it gets ugly. I will kind of, raise up on them and be like, because I'm your mother, and when I can just remember that I can take the lead from them about what they need. And if I'm unsure, that I can, especially now as they're older, actually ask them what they need. That helps me stay in sync with them and, be able to actually meet them where they are and continue to walk with them as their parent.
I'll say there's so much, and there's so much bad advice. We could have a whole series on some of the bad advice we were given that we've learned the hard way to get rid of. But I would say it's this. There's a difference between giving yourself a child and giving your child a life.
Oh, that's great. I would say shame is not a successful parenting tactic for anything. And even if God told you it was at some point. So thank you all for hanging out, for joining and stuff. At last time, Brian and I answered a question on the podcast about parenting. I got barraged by people saying, talk more about parenting, which is odd considering normally it's 90-minute conversations with philosophers and theologians. Well, I guess it does basically mean the philosophers and theologians are not that good at parenting. But they
want to be.
But they want to be. Or they just take everything too seriously. So last thing, but Brian, remind them where to go find the children's book. Tell them about the whole, like, anyone can get it type of thing.
Sure. Well, Cory and the Seventh Story, if you order it by Friday, it will be delivered by Christmas. It's actually at the printers right now, so it gets shipped out on Saturday. So if they go to the7thstory.com, they can go there, or you can go to my website, brianmclaren.net. And either place you'll find information about it. And there's also an adult, we wrote this book for children, but then we wrote an adult companion book that has a whole lot more words because it's so much harder to get through to adults. And if you get the children's book, you'll get the adult book thrown in. So,
all righty. Well, now you've heard it. Thank you all for joining the excitement. And let everyone know about children's book, and Daneen, let us know when yours comes out so we can hang out on the internet again. Hopefully Micky's is in process now that.
No, I'm working on it.
Mm-hmm.
And can I just say, you three have amazing stuff to say on this subject, and I hope you all keep talking about it a lot.
We need to do a parenting session at Wild Goose. I was having ugly crying bonding sessions with other parents about all of this and the stress of feeling like you're failing your kids in the middle of a faith shift. So to do that, Micky, if you're there, I'm going to be there too.
Yep.
And I mentioned, because I think parents need support in this space in a big way, even just to know that we're not, eternally signing them up for a never-ending therapy.
Keep therapists employed.
Some therapy is good. Yes.
Awesome.
Thank you all.
Peace.